When Nikon announced the D4 and the D800 earlier this year, there was mad panic and hysteria and crazy long waiting lists, months and months for people to get their camera. Then, just before Photokina, they announced the D600, which had been leaked everywhere. Everyone knew exactly what was coming, but then they surprised us by rushing it to market in just a couple of weeks. 3 FX cameras in 1 year, is it too much? Who is this aimed at? Should you get one? Is it a D800's little brother, or is it a slightly pimped out D7000? I don't know, let's have a look. Okay, at 24 and a bit megapixels, this is a far cry behind the 36 megapixel of the D800. Don't get me wrong, I don't think that's a bad thing. Actually, I think that's one of the best things this has going for it. 24 megapixel is mammoth. That's what the D3X has. That's about the equivalent of really good quality film, and it's more than enough for what 99% of photographers actually need. Big numbers are great, but you know, it's big files, big computers are needed to crunch them, and it can be a big pain in the ass buying all the memory cards as well. So let's take a look at how the rest of the specs on this guy stack up. Okay, it's great to see that this guy has dual SD cards. I prefer compact flash, to be honest, but the fact that it has 2 is good. You can use it to copy between the 2 as backup or overflow. Another big positive on this guy, 100% viewfinder coverage. If you want to be able to frame up your shot and be confident of what you're seeing is what you're going to get, 100% frame coverage is great, and it's not something you get on the lower level bodies. Something that often gets skimped on with cameras that are in that transition point in the market is the autofocus system. It's true that this one doesn't have the superior system of the D800, but it does have a 39-point system with 9 cross types and good support for slower lenses. So on paper, that's fantastic. Shutter speed range is 30 seconds up to 1/4000th of a second, and it has a flash sync speed of up to 250, you know, with the supported flashes. Frames per second, this one is no slouch at 5.5 frames a second, but it is behind the D7000, which is 6 frames a second. But given that the D7000 is touted as the DX sports camera for Nikon, 5.5 is not too sloppy. It's got a composite body like Canon's transition camera, the 6D. Parts of it are magnesium alloy, parts of it are a plastic composite. I have to say I prefer the grip on the Canon version. This one is a little bit small for my hand, but overall the body feels nice and strong. Whilst it's great that this guy has a pop-up flash built in, that is of course a potential weak point in design, which is why the Canon full frames don't have it. It'll do 1080p at 30 frames a second, or drop it down to 1280 and it'll do 60 frames a second. It does have mic input, and hallelujah, it has a headphone jack. It also has HDMI out, an ISO range of 100 to 6400, and it'll boost from 50 to 25,600. It's not a huge range, but it's how it uses those numbers that's most important. We're going to test that as we go through. Look, I have been testing this one for the weekend, and I have to say, in terms of handling, I think it's good. The button layout is really familiar. It's got the front and rear dials, which is great to be able to control your aperture and shutter speed, or more than one thing at a time, rather than having to go into a menu system or use a dial on the back of the camera, which means kind of taking it away from your face. The balance of weight is really nice, and one thing that is getting on my nerves a little bit though is, whilst it has such a great 39-point focus system, and they are really effective, if you get a focus point on one of its covered areas, it's really effective in grabbing focus super quickly. I'm really impressed, but, and it's a major but, they're all grouped together right in the center of screen, which is just ridiculous. I really think that a big leap in the next couple of years we're going to see is using different focusing systems that give you focus points right out into the corners. Something like the Nikon 1 series, which has been much maligned, has astounding autofocus, and it is able to focus right in the corners. Having all of these grouped in the center, which famously is shaped like a sanitary napkin, it's a shame, because if you want to track things and use all of those cross-type sensors and really get the most out of it, you still need to be framing your subject in the central part of the scene. Otherwise, there just isn't a focus point there for it to grab with. Overall, I really like the curves of this one. Of course, aesthetics are going to be a personal choice. It does feel a little bit more plasticky than the D800. It is a fair bit cheaper than them, so that's not much of a surprise, and the fact that it is literally more plasticky than the D800. A downside, if you want things like GPS or Wi-Fi, you need to buy the external adapter and they're horrendously expensive, whereas the kind of major competitor to this one, the Canon 6D, has them built in. A lot of people won't want them, but if you do want them, you're really looking at several $100s per piece to add that kind of functionality to this camera. As always, it's going to come down to the image quality. So again, let's go to my current Muse Tina and get some sample shots to see how it stacks up.
Okay, I shot this camera with a series of different lenses and I found the focus really good and I don't know, I think it's a really good performer. In terms of tracking, it did surprisingly well. Left to right, it did really well. Coming straight up to the camera, it had a little bit of a trouble sometimes and was missing the focus on maybe 1 in 3 shots, but it still seemed to be tracking her skin tone quite well. Now looking at high ISO, at 400, 800 and 1600, they're all really nice and clean. By the time we get to 3200, it is already starting to show a fair bit of grain if we look up close there. Not too much though, perfectly usable. Here at 6400 though, and I'd say it's much more noticeable there. But then at 12,800, I would use it as a last resort. I wouldn't be going beyond there. When you're willing to trade off noise just to get the shot, then high ISO is great. But looking at the ISOs we generally actually shoot at is more useful. That was shot at ISO 800 and it's just beautifully clean.
Look, there really is a lot to like about the D600 and I don't want to knock it. It is full frame, it does offer 100% coverage, it does have dual card slots, it does have a decent screen and a pretty good burst mode. The image quality is fantastic and it's great to have the mic input and the headphone out on this guy. It's a definite notch below the D800 in many regards, but that's not a put down. The D800 is overkill for most situations. I think Nikon has really hit a sweet spot in the market here for enthusiasts who want to go to full frame, who don't need ultimate rugged reliability but want fantastic image quality and the second memory card. Good speed as well. I think it really has a pretty good balance for a lot of photographers out there. It's just a shame that the add-ons like Wi-Fi, GPS and all the other trimmings cost such a fortune, and the battery grip. So you're going to have to weigh up whether you want those kind of features and whether the D600 is right for you. But in terms of specs and image performance, I think it's a pretty sweet little number. I am going to put this head to head with the D800 and maybe just with the Canon 6D as well. So make sure you click to subscribe, like and share, and I'll see you soon for more photo news and reviews.
Hey guys, whilst you're here, you might like to check out my Take Control of the Light workshop tour, a comparison of the 600 and 1100D, my tutorial on long exposure photography, and on storytelling photography with Tina. Thanks!